My daughter said she wished she had been raised by her stepdad and not me. So my name is Edwin, and I am 54 years old, a retired construction worker with calloused hands and a heart that has seen better days. Today, I am sitting in this fancy restaurant, waiting for my daughter Jessica. It has been 3 years since I last saw her. My fingers nervously tap against the white tablecloth as I spot her walking through the door, beautiful and accomplished, but her eyes are cold. The words she spoke cut deeper than any knife could. I wish I had been raised by Bradley instead of you. Before I tell you what I did next, that left her in tears forever, let me know where you are watching from and hit subscribe to hear real-life stories from people just like us. I met Amanda when we were both young and full of dreams. She was a college student working part-time at a local diner, and I was a young man just starting out in construction. We fell in love quickly, married within a year, and welcomed our daughter Jessica into the world shortly after. Those early years were beautiful despite the struggles. I can still remember holding Jessica in my arms the day she was born, her tiny fingers wrapping around my calloused thumb, and feeling that overwhelming sense of love and responsibility wash over me. Our little family lived in a modest 2-bedroom house on the outskirts of town. It was not much, but we made it home. I worked long hours in construction, often taking jobs that kept me away for days or weeks at a time. The pay was good, and I wanted to provide for my family. Amanda stayed home with Jessica until she started kindergarten, then took a part-time job at a local boutique. Jessica was a daddy's girl from the beginning. When I was home, she would follow me everywhere, her little footsteps echoing mine. We had our special rituals. Every Sunday morning, I would make pancakes shaped like animals, and she would giggle as I attempted increasingly ridiculous creatures. "Make an elephant, Daddy," she would squeal, and I would try my best, even though it usually ended up looking more like a blob with a trunk. At night, I would read her stories, doing all the voices for different characters. Her favorite was when I read The 3 Little Pigs, and I would huff and puff so dramatically that she would burst into fits of laughter. Those moments, those simple, perfect moments, they meant everything to me. But as the years passed, things began to change. Amanda became increasingly distant, often irritable with me when I returned home from jobs. I attributed it to the strain of my absences to the fact that she was essentially raising Jessica alone much of the time. I tried to make up for it when I was home bringing gifts, planning special outings, but the distance between us continued to grow. The truth emerged on a rainy Tuesday evening. I had come home a day early from a job site, eager to surprise my family. Instead, I was the one surprised. As I pulled into our driveway, I noticed an unfamiliar luxury car parked there. Through the front window, I saw Amanda in the arms of another man. Bradley Thompson, a banker, well-dressed, well-spoken, and apparently well-acquainted with my wife. The confrontation that followed was ugly. Accusations, tears, broken dishes. Jessica, then 12 years old, hid in her room covering her ears against our shouting. When I finally calmed down enough to have a rational conversation, Amanda admitted that the affair had been going on for over a year. She wanted a divorce. She wanted to be with Bradley. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Amanda hired an aggressive attorney while I could barely afford legal representation. She fought for primary custody of Jessica, arguing that my inconsistent presence due to work made me an unsuitable full-time parent. The judge agreed. I was granted weekend visitation rights and ordered to pay child support. Within 2 months of our divorce being finalized, Amanda and Jessica moved into Bradley's large house in the affluent part of town. And that is when the systematic separation began. Initially, I would drive to their new home to pick up Jessica for our weekends together, but increasingly, there were excuses. Jessica had dance recitals, school projects, sleepovers with new friends. The frequency of our visits decreased. When I did get to see her, Jessica seemed different, more reserved, less affectionate. She spoke constantly of the things Bradley bought her, the places he took her, the promises he made about her future. Each time a little piece of my heart broke off. Then came the summer when Amanda announced they would be spending 3 months in Europe, as Bradley had business there. I protested, pointing out that this would eliminate most of my visitation time, but my objections fell on deaf ears. They went to Europe. When they returned, Jessica was even more distant. I still remember my last night in our old house before I had to sell it and move to a small apartment. I sat in Jessica's empty bedroom, now stripped of her posters and stuffed animals. The pink walls seemed to mock me with memories of bedtime stories and whispered secrets. I traced my fingers along the doorframe where we had marked her height every year on her birthday. I cried that night, truly cried for the first time since the divorce. Not just for the loss of my marriage, but for the daughter I could feel slipping away. There was a double betrayal happening, and I was powerless to stop it. My wife had betrayed our vows, that was painful enough. But now I could feel my daughter, my Jessica, my pancake, loving story, time giggling little girl being pulled away from me. Not just physically by distance and custody arrangements, but emotionally as well. Each time I saw her, there was less of the connection we once shared. It was as if they were systematically erasing me from her life, replacing me with the wealthier, more polished version that Bradley represented. As I locked the door to that house for the final time, I did not know that things were about to get even worse. After selling our family home, I moved 3 states away to Colorado. The construction industry was booming there, and I needed the work. More than that, I needed distance from the constant reminder of what I had lost. I rented a small 1-bedroom apartment near the job site, bare and functional. Nothing like the warm family home I had shared with Amanda and Jessica. Despite the distance, I was determined to maintain my relationship with my daughter. I called regularly, though our conversations grew increasingly strained. Jessica, now entering her teenage years, seemed perpetually busy or disinterested. Still, I persisted. I sent birthday cards with long, heartfelt notes. I mailed Christmas and graduation gifts. I asked about her friends, her hobbies, her dreams. Slowly, the responses dwindled. Calls went to voicemail. Text messages received 1 word, replies then none at all. Cards came back unopened. Gifts were returned with polite but firm notes, explaining they were unnecessary. I kept trying, adjusting my approach, hoping to find the key that would unlock the door that had closed between us. In desperation, I turned to social media to catch glimpses of Jessica's life. Her profiles were mostly private, but occasionally public posts would appear. I saw her growing up in photographs, school dances in expensive dresses, vacations to tropical islands and European cities, always smiling, often with Amanda and Bradley flanking her like proud parents. The 3 of them began to look like a unit, a family to which I did not belong. One photo particularly stung. Jessica at her 16th birthday party, standing before a brand new car with a giant bow on it. Bradley's arm was around her shoulder, and the caption read, "Best dad ever, thank you for making all my dreams come true." I stared at that photo for hours, a pain like physical illness spreading through my chest. Not just because of the dad reference, but because I remembered how I had been saving for years to buy Jessica a used car for her 16th birthday. The money I had set aside was nowhere near enough for the luxury vehicle Bradley had casually gifted her. When Jessica was about to start college, I contacted Amanda about contributing to her education expenses. It was important to me to help provide for my daughter's future, despite our estrangement. The response was polite but dismissive. Bradley had set up a college fund years ago. My contribution was not needed. Everything was taken care of. Once again, I had been rendered irrelevant in my own daughter's life. The greatest blow came when Jessica's college graduation arrived. I had not received an invitation, but I knew the date from social media. I drove 14 hours to attend planning to surprise her, and perhaps use the milestone as an opportunity to reconnect. I arrived at the university, bought a bouquet of her favorite flowers, at least they had been her favorites when she was 12, and searched the crowd for a glimpse of my daughter in her cap and gown. I spotted Amanda and Bradley first seated in a reserved section near the front. They looked older but prosperous. Amanda's hair expertly highlighted Bradley's silver temples, giving him a distinguished air. And then I saw Jessica lining up with the other graduates, tall and poised. My heart swelled with pride and longing. I started to make my way toward their section, flowers in hand. Before I could reach them, I heard the announcer call the next graduate, Jessica Thompson. Not Jessica Walker, my surname, but Thompson, Bradley's name. It was like a physical blow. I stopped in my tracks, suddenly feeling foolish with my drugstore bouquet and department store suit. I watched from a distance as she accepted her diploma as her mother and stepfather stood and cheered. I did not approach them afterward. I drove the 14 hours back to Colorado with the wilting flowers on the passenger seat beside me. 2 years later, I was flipping through channels one evening when I caught a glimpse of a familiar face on the local news. Jessica, now working as a marketing executive for a major corporation, was being interviewed about a new community initiative. She was poised, articulate, confident. When asked about her background, she mentioned growing up in a supportive family environment, crediting her stepfather, Bradley Thompson, for inspiring her career path. There was no mention of me, not even in passing. It was as if I had never existed in her life. That night, I sat on my balcony until dawn, watching the stars fade and wondering where I had gone so wrong. Had my absences for work during her childhood really justified such complete erasure? Had I been such a terrible father that I deserved to be forgotten? Or had Amanda and Bradley systematically turned her against me, rewriting history to cast me as the villain in their narrative? Despite everything, I could not give up hope that someday, somehow, my daughter and I might find our way back to each other. I kept a small box of mementos from her childhood, a crayon drawing of our family, the Father's Day card she made in 2nd grade, a seashell from our trip to the beach when she was 6. Sometimes on my darkest days, I would open that box and remember that once I had been her daddy, her hero, the one who made elephant-shaped pancakes and read stories with funny voices. The years passed, and that hope grew fainter, but never completely disappeared. The years after my divorce were some of the hardest of my life. Without the anchor of family, I drifted. The first few months in Colorado, I barely functioned outside of work. I would put in long hours at the construction site, come home to my sparse apartment, drink until I could sleep, then repeat the cycle the next day. Weekends were the worst. The empty hours stretched before me no longer filled with Jessica's laughter or family outings. My supervisor noticed my decline. After I nearly caused an accident on site due to exhaustion and hangover, he pulled me aside. "This job will kill you if you let it," he warned. "And from the looks of it, you are letting it." He connected me with George, an older worker who led a support group for divorced men. I went reluctantly at first, only to avoid being fired. The group met in the basement of a local church every Thursday evening. 6 to 10 men of various ages sat in a circle sharing stories of loss, betrayal, and loneliness that echoed my own. George, a 65-year-old electrician, who had lost his wife and access to his children 20 years prior, became something of a mentor to me. "You cannot control what happened," he told me after one particularly bitter session where I railed against Amanda and Bradley. "You can only control what happens next." Slowly, with the group's support, I began to rebuild. I cut back on drinking. I started eating properly again. I joined a gym working out my frustrations on punching bags and weight machines. Physical exhaustion proved a better sleep aid than alcohol. I began to volunteer on weekends helping build houses for low-income families. Using my skills for something positive gave me purpose. 4 years into my Colorado life, I was promoted to site supervisor. The pay increase allowed me to move into a small but comfortable house with a yard. I planted a garden, finding unexpected satisfaction in nurturing growing things. I adopted a dog from the shelter, a mutt named Rusty, who became my constant companion. Life was not happy exactly, but it was livable. The sharp edges of grief had dulled to a persistent ache that I carried, but was not crippled by. Then came the accident. We were working on a high-rise in downtown Denver. A sudden gust of wind, a momentary lapse in safety protocol, and a steel beam swung free. I pushed 2 younger workers out of its path, but could not clear it myself. The impact shattered my right leg and caused internal injuries that required 3 surgeries. At 50 years old, my body could not bounce back the way it once might have. After 6 months of painful rehabilitation, it became clear I would never return to construction work. The workers' compensation and insurance settlement provided enough for me to live modestly, but the loss of my career was another blow. Construction had been my life since I was 18 years old. It had given me identity, purpose, community. Now I spent my days in physical therapy and staring at the walls of my house. It was during this forced convalescence that I began to truly process everything I had lost. With nothing but time, the memories and regrets I had held at bay through work and activity came flooding back. I started keeping a journal, pouring out my thoughts about Amanda, about Jessica, about the family we had been, and the stranger I had become. I wrote letters to Jessica that I never sent, telling her about my life, asking about hers, expressing the love that had never diminished despite the years and distance. As I healed physically, I discovered a new interest: photography. It started with simple landscape shots taken during short walks with Rusty as I rebuilt my strength. There was something therapeutic about capturing moments of beauty, about framing the world in ways that made sense when so much of my own life felt fractured. I invested in better equipment, took some online courses, and found I had a decent eye. Several of my photos even sold at a local art fair, which gave me an unexpected boost of confidence. It was through photography that I met Carol. She was a widow in her late 40s who lived 3 houses down. I noticed her tending her impressive flower garden and asked if I could photograph it. She agreed and afterward invited me in for coffee. That coffee led to friendship, then to something more. Carol understood loss in ways most people could not. She did not try to fix me or rush me through grief. She simply walked beside me, offering companionship without demands. Our relationship developed slowly, tentatively, neither of us quite believing we deserved another chance at happiness. We did not live together or discuss marriage, but we spent most evenings in each other's company, cooking dinner, watching old movies, or simply sitting in comfortable silence. Carol knew all about Jessica, had seen the photos, and heard the stories. "She will come back to you someday," Carol would say with quiet certainty. "The truth has a way of finding the light." I was not as confident, but I wanted to believe her. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, the mail carrier delivered an envelope that would change everything. The return address made my hands shake: Jessica Walker Thompson. Inside was an elegant invitation to her wedding, scheduled for 3 months later. No note, no personal message, just the formal invitation that had presumably gone out to 100 other guests. I sat on my front porch for hours that day, the invitation in my hands, trying to understand what it meant. Why invite me now after years of silence? Was this a genuine olive branch or some sort of obligation she felt? Perhaps Amanda had insisted a gesture toward propriety. Or maybe Jessica herself was taking a tentative step toward reconciliation. That same week, I received a call from an old neighbor in our former town. She had kept in loose contact over the years, occasionally updating me on town gossip. This call contained an interesting piece of information. Amanda and Bradley had divorced 2 years earlier. Apparently, Bradley had left her for a younger woman who worked at his bank. Amanda had been devastated, according to the neighborhood rumor mill. I felt no satisfaction at this news, only a vague sense of life's strange circularity. Did Jessica's wedding invitation have something to do with this change in family dynamics? With Bradley no longer her mother's husband, perhaps Jessica felt free to reconnect with me. Or perhaps with her own wedding approaching, she was thinking about family in ways she had not before. Whatever the reason, I knew I would attend. Despite everything, she was still my daughter. I would be there for her important day, even if I was relegated to the back row of the church, the estranged father figure brought in for the sake of appearances. As I started planning my trip, I could not help but wonder, would this wedding be the end of something or the beginning? The wedding invitation sat on my mantel for weeks, a beacon of both hope and anxiety. I confirmed my attendance with the RSVP card, then began preparing for what felt like the most important journey of my life. I bought a new suit, dark blue and well-fitted. I got a proper haircut. I even practiced what I might say if given the chance to speak with Jessica privately. But what would I bring as a gift? The usual household items from the registry seemed too impersonal for this potential reconnection. After much thought, I decided on something more meaningful. Over the next few weeks, I compiled an album of photographs and memories from Jessica's childhood. Photos of her first steps, first day of school, birthday parties. Ticket stubs from the movies we had seen together. The recipe for those animal-shaped pancakes she had loved. And finally, a letter. Not the angry, hurt letters I had written during those dark years, but a new one expressing only love, forgiveness, and hope for her happiness. As the wedding date approached, I flew back to my former hometown. I booked a room at a modest hotel, not wanting to impose on old acquaintances. The rehearsal dinner was not included in my invitation, so I spent that evening alone in my room, mentally preparing for the next day. The wedding venue was a historic estate with manicured gardens and a renovated barn decorated with twinkling lights and floral arrangements. I arrived early, unsure of where I should position myself. Not with the family, surely, but where I took a seat toward the back on the bride's side, nodding politely to other guests, who seemed equally uncertain about who I was. I spotted Amanda across the lawn, looking elegant in a silver dress that complemented her still attractive figure. Our eyes met briefly. She gave a small, tight nod of acknowledgement before turning away to greet other guests. I had expected coldness, or perhaps open hostility, but this blank civility was somehow worse. Then I saw Jessica for the first time in years. She was in a side room visible through an open door, surrounded by bridesmaids in pale blue dresses. Even from a distance, the sight of her took my breath away. No longer the child or even the young woman from graduation, but a poised adult. Her wedding gown was sophisticated and elegant. Her hair swept up to reveal the face that, despite the passing years, still held echoes of the little girl I had once known so well. Gathering my courage, I approached the room, standing at the threshold until she noticed me. The bridesmaids fell silent, sensing tension. Jessica looked up, her expression changing from surprise to something unreadable. "You came," she said, her voice neither warm nor cold. "I would not miss it," I replied, my rehearsed speeches evaporating. "You look beautiful, Jessica." "Thank you." She glanced at her bridesmaids, then back to me. "I need to finish getting ready." "Of course, I just wanted to say hello and congratulations." She nodded, already turning back to her preparations. The exchange lasted less than a minute, but it left me shaken. There had been no embrace, no emotional reconciliation. Just polite distance, as if I were a distant relative or old family friend, not the man who had once been the center of her world. I returned to my seat, the gift album heavy in my hands. As the ceremony time approached, I watched the other guests arrive. Then, with a shock, I saw Bradley entering with several well-dressed people who appeared to be his family. He looked older, but still carried himself with the confident air of wealth and privilege. He did not see me moving directly to a reserved section at the front. The music began, signaling the start of the ceremony. The groom and his groomsmen took their places at the altar. The bridesmaids processed down the aisle. Then the music changed to the traditional bridal march. All eyes turned to the back of the venue, and there was Jessica, radiant in white. But it was not me at her side, ready to walk her down the aisle. It was Bradley, beaming with paternal pride. My heart seemed to stop. In that moment, I understood my place in this ceremony in Jessica's life. I was an afterthought, a box checked for propriety's sake. The role of father had been given to another man, not just in the practical day-to-day raising of my daughter, but now in this most symbolic of moments. I watched in a daze as Bradley escorted Jessica down the aisle, as he placed her hand in her groom's, as he took his seat beside Amanda in the front row. The ceremony proceeded, vows were exchanged, rings given. And then came the moment that confirmed everything. In her speech, thanking guests at the reception, Jessica publicly thanked Bradley for being the father I needed, the one who was always there, who taught me what a good man looks like. I did not stay for the dancing. I left the album on the gift table and slipped away unnoticed in the celebration. Back in my hotel room, I sat by the window watching night fall, feeling a strange emptiness. Not the sharp pain I had expected, but something deeper, more final. A recognition that some losses cannot be undone, some relationships cannot be reconstructed from ashes. I returned to Colorado the next day, to my quiet house and Carol's sympathetic presence. I told her everything, including my decision to finally let go of the hope that had sustained and tortured me for so many years. Sometimes love means accepting that you are not wanted, I said, surprising myself with the calm in my voice. Life resumed its rhythm. I expanded my photography hobby into a small business, specializing in landscapes and architectural shots that drew on my construction background. Carol and I continued our comfortable companionship. I volunteered more with the housing charity, finding purpose in helping others build the homes and families I had lost. Then, a month after the wedding, my phone rang with a number I did not recognize. I answered to hear Jessica's voice, tentative and slightly breathless. "Dad, I was wondering if we could meet. There are some things I need to talk to you about." I agreed, suggesting a restaurant halfway between us. As I hung up, I felt neither excitement nor dread, just a quiet curiosity about what my daughter might want after all this time. The restaurant Jessica suggested was upscale, the kind of place where waiters wear bow ties and wine costs more per glass than I used to make in an hour of construction work. I arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a table near the back where we could talk privately. My hands were steady as I ordered water and waited, watching the door. Jessica arrived 20 minutes late, dressed in an expensive business suit, her wedding ring catching the light as she moved. She looked like success personified every inch the corporate executive. But as she approached, I noticed small details that spoke of strain. Shadows under her eyes carefully concealed with makeup. A tightness around her mouth. The slightly too firm set of her shoulders. "Sorry I am late," she said, taking the seat across from me. "Traffic was terrible." "No problem," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "It is good to see you, Jessica." The waiter appeared and we went through the ritual of ordering drinks and appetizers. The conversation remained stubbornly on safe topics. The weather, her honeymoon in Bali, my recovery from the construction accident. She asked polite questions about my life in Colorado, but seemed only partially interested in the answers. Finally, as our entrees arrived, the pretense of casual conversation exhausted itself. A silence fell between us, heavy with unspoken words. I waited, letting her be the one to break it. "I appreciated you coming to the wedding," she said finally, her eyes on her plate rather than meeting mine. "I was honored to be invited," I replied, though honored was not quite the right word for what I had felt. Another silence. She pushed food around her plate. Then, without warning, she looked up, her expression suddenly hard. "Why did you leave us?" The question caught me off guard. "Leave you, Jessica, your mother divorced me. She left with you to be with Bradley." She shook her head sharply. "That is not how Mom tells it. She said you abandoned us. That you chose your work over your family, that you were never there even before the divorce. That you could have fought harder for custody but did not want the responsibility." I set down my fork, stunned by this rewriting of history. "Is that what you believe? What am I supposed to believe, you were never around after the divorce? Because I was not allowed to be your mother and Bradley systematically cut me out of your life. Changed plans at the last minute. Took you on long trips during my visitation time. Eventually stopped answering my calls altogether. You could have tried harder," she insisted, a flush rising in her cheeks. "Bradley was there for everything. Every school play, every soccer game, every parent-teacher conference. He helped me with homework. He taught me to drive. He was a real father." Each word was a knife, but I kept my expression neutral. "I am glad you had someone there for you, Jessica. Truly. But please understand, it was not by my choice that I was absent." She scoffed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "That is convenient, is not it, blaming Mom and Bradley for everything. Taking no responsibility." Then came the words that would have broken me years ago. "I wish I had been raised by Bradley instead of you." I sat very still, absorbing the blow. Part of me wanted to defend myself, to shout the truth, to make her understand the years of pain and rejection. But something in her expression, a flicker of something beyond anger, made me pause. "Why are we really here, Jessica? Why, after all this time, did you reach out?" She looked away, her composure cracking slightly. "I need help." "What kind of help?" The story came out in fits and starts. After her mother and Bradley divorced, certain financial realities had become clear. Bradley had been generous while married to Amanda, treating Jessica as his own daughter. But post-divorce, that generosity had clear limits. He had paid for the wedding as promised, but made it clear that was his final financial contribution to her life. Jessica and her new husband had overextended themselves. The expensive wedding, a luxury honeymoon, the down payment on a house in an exclusive neighborhood, credit card debt accumulated during their courtship. Now they were struggling to keep up with payments. Mom cannot help. After the divorce, she did not get nearly what she expected. The prenup was apparently very specific. Jessica's voice had taken on a bitter edge. "I thought maybe you..." You thought I might have money to bail you out. I finished for her. She had the grace to look embarrassed. You own your house outright in Colorado, right? In a market that has appreciated significantly. If you sold it, you could help us get back on our feet. Just until we get things sorted out. And there it was. After years of absence, after allowing another man to take my place, after not even a thank you for the wedding gift, she had reached out, not for reconciliation, but for financial rescue. I should have been angry. A few years ago, I would have been. But sitting across from my daughter, seeing the person she had become, I felt something else entirely. A profound sadness, yes, but also a strange sense of clarity. Jessica, I said quietly, is this meeting about rebuilding our relationship, or is it just about money? Her hesitation told me everything I needed to know. I did not respond immediately to Jessica's request. Instead, I reached into my jacket and removed a folder I had brought just in case this conversation took exactly the turn it had. I placed it on the table between us and opened it. Before I answer that question, I would like to show you something. Inside were documents I had preserved over the years. First, bank statements showing every child support payment I had made, always on time, often with additional money included, with notes like, for Jessica's dance lessons, or toward summer camp. Next, copies of cards and letters I had sent marked, return to sender, in Amanda's handwriting. Printouts of emails that had gone unanswered. Phone records showing calls that were never returned. I never missed a payment, I said quietly. Not once in all those years. I sent cards for every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone I could think of. Most came back unopened. Jessica stared at the evidence, her expression shifting from disbelief to confusion. I continued, turning to another section of the folder. Here are the records of when I tried to assert my visitation rights. 3 times I hired lawyers I could barely afford to petition the court. Each time your mother presented reasons why visits were impractical or disruptive. Each time she had better lawyers. Eventually, I ran out of money to keep fighting. I showed her copies of checks I had sent for her 16th birthday, for graduation, for other special occasions. All had been returned or never cashed. I showed her emails to Amanda, asking for updates on Jessica's life, most unanswered or responded to with the briefest of notes. And this, I said, pulling out one final document, is the trust I set up for your education. When your mother told me Bradley had already established a college fund, I created this instead. I could not contribute much at first, but over the years it grew. When you graduated, I anonymously donated it to a scholarship fund for students studying marketing, which I knew from social media was your field. I could not give it to you directly, but I thought at least it could help someone like you. Jessica's face had gone pale. She picked up one of the returned cards, opening it to read the message inside, the words of love and longing from a father to his daughter. I did not know, she whispered. Mom said you never tried to contact us after the first year, that you had started a new life and did not want to be bothered. That was not true, I said simply. I never stopped trying to be part of your life. I never stopped loving you. She looked up at me, tears forming in her eyes. But at the wedding you did not say anything. When Bradley walked me down the aisle, when I thanked him in my speech, you just sat there. What would you have had me do? Make a scene at your wedding? Publicly challenge the narrative your mother and Bradley had constructed? Would you have thanked me for that? She did not answer, which was answer enough. I pulled out one more item from my pocket. A checkbook. For a moment, hope flickered in her eyes. I am not going to sell my house to pay off your debts, Jessica. The hope died, replaced by a flash of anger. So you came here just to make me feel bad, to prove Mom was lying. No, I said, writing on the check. I came because despite everything, you are my daughter. I will always love you even when that love is not returned. But love does not mean I will enable poor decisions or financial irresponsibility. I finished writing, tore out the check, and slid it across the table. Jessica looked down, then back up in confusion. The check was made out not to her, but to a children's literacy charity in her name for a modest but significant amount. This is the gift I choose to give you today. Not money in your pocket, but a lesson I wish I had been allowed to teach you years ago. About values. About responsibility. About the difference between love and indulgence. She stared at the check, then at me, in emotions warring on her face. Bradley may have given you material advantages I never could. He may have been present for moments I was forced to miss. But there is one thing he clearly never gave you: limits. The understanding that actions have consequences. That adulthood means taking responsibility for your own choices. I closed the folder and returned it to my jacket. You chose Bradley as your father figure. You let him walk you down the aisle. You publicly proclaimed him your real father. That was your choice, and I respect it. But it means that logically, he should be the one you turn to in times of financial need. Jessica's expression had shifted from anger to shock, and now to something like shame. A tear slipped down her cheek, followed by another. What if he will not help? Then you and your husband will need to solve your financial problems yourselves. Sell the house you cannot afford. Cut up the credit cards. Live within your means. Millions of people do it every day. I stood, placing enough cash on the table to cover both our meals. You have my number now. If you ever want to build a real relationship based on who we are rather than what I can give you, I would welcome that. But I will not be used as an ATM by a daughter who has made it clear that I was only good enough to be her father when she needed something. I turned to leave, then paused, looking back at her tear-stained face. You said earlier that you wished Bradley had raised you instead of me. The irony is he did, and yet here you are asking me for help when he turned you away. Think about that. With those words, I walked out of the restaurant, my heart heavy, but my steps lighter than they had been in years. I drove back to my hotel in a strange state of calm. For 15 years, I had carried the weight of Jessica's absence, blaming myself, wondering what I could have done differently. Now, having faced the truth of her perception and laid bare my own, I felt something shift inside me. Not happiness exactly, but a sense of rightness, of having finally stood in my truth. That night, I called Carol and told her everything. Her voice was warm with support. You did the right thing, Edwin. The hard thing, but the right thing. I do not know if she will ever speak to me again, I admitted. That is her choice, Carol replied. But for the first time, you have made yours. That matters. I flew home the next day, expecting to put the entire incident behind me. I had said my piece. I had shown Jessica the truth. Whether she accepted it or not was beyond my control. I returned to my photography, to my volunteer work, to the quiet life I had built from the wreckage of my former one. A week passed, then another. I had almost convinced myself that the chapter was truly closed when a thick envelope arrived in the mail, Jessica's handwriting on the front. Inside was a letter several pages long, written in what appeared to be a shaking hand. Dear Dad. It began the word Dad heavily inked, as if she had pressed down hard while writing it. What followed was a confession and an apology. After our meeting, Jessica had gone to her mother, confronting her with the evidence I had shown. Amanda had broken down, admitting to years of manipulation and lies. Yes, she had returned my letters. Yes, she had blocked my calls. Yes, she and Bradley had deliberately scheduled events during my visitation times. They had systematically erased me from Jessica's life, painting me as the villain to justify their own actions. I was a child, Jessica wrote. I believed what they told me because it was easier than questioning why my father was not around. As I got older, I should have questioned it, should have reached out directly, but the narrative was so established by then. It was easier to keep believing you did not care than to face the possibility that the people who raised me had lied. She went on to describe the aftermath of Amanda and Bradley's divorce, how Bradley had revealed his true colors, making it clear that his generosity extended only as far as his marriage to Amanda, how her mother had become bitter and demanding, leaning heavily on Jessica for emotional and sometimes financial support. After you left the restaurant, she continued, I sat there for 2 hours, reading and rereading those letters you sent, the ones I never knew existed. I saw the father I had forgotten, the one who made animal pancakes and did funny voices during bedtime stories, the one who loved me unconditionally even when I gave him no reason to. She ended with a request, not for money this time, but for a second chance. I do not expect forgiveness. What I did at my wedding, letting Bradley walk me down the aisle, thanking him publicly while you sat there alone, was unforgivable. But if you would be willing to meet again, just to talk, I would be grateful for the opportunity. I read the letter 3 times before calling her. We agreed to meet halfway between our homes at a public park rather than a restaurant. Neutral ground, open air, no pretensions. When I arrived, Jessica was already there, sitting on a bench near a small pond. She was dressed simply, jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked younger, more vulnerable without the corporate armor she had worn at the restaurant. Thank you for coming, she said as I sat beside her. Thank you for writing, I replied. We sat in silence for a few moments, watching ducks glide across the water. Then, without warning, Jessica began to cry. Not the few dignified tears of our restaurant meeting, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from someplace long buried. I am so sorry, she managed between breaths. I did not know. I really did not know. I put my arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into me, crying against my chest, like she had as a little girl after falling off her bike or waking from a nightmare. I held her, letting her release years of misdirected anger and new painful revelations. When she quieted, I reached into my bag and pulled out the album I had created for her wedding, the one I had left on the gift table and assumed she had never opened. I brought this again, I said. I thought you might want to see it now. Together we paged through the photographs and mementos. Jessica asked questions about each one, filling in gaps in her memories, learning the history that had been kept from her. When we reached the letter at the back, I asked if she wanted to read it. Would you read it to me? She requested, her voice small. So I did, my voice steady despite the emotion behind the words. It was a letter of love, of forgiveness, of hope for her future happiness, regardless of what role I might play in it. When I finished, Jessica wiped her eyes. I did not deserve that. Not after how I treated you. Love is not about deserving, I told her. It is about giving anyway. We talked for hours that day, beginning the slow, careful process of getting to know each other again. Not as the father and daughter we had been, but as the people we had become. Jessica told me about her job, her husband Michael, her hopes and challenges. I shared stories of my life in Colorado, my photography, my friendship with Carol. We did not try to recapture the past, but instead to build something new from the truth we now shared. Before we parted, Jessica asked, "What happens now?" "That depends on what you want," I replied honestly. I would like to have a relationship with you, but it needs to be real, built on truth and respect, not obligation or financial need. I would like that too, she said. And Dad, I am going to fix my financial situation myself. Michael and I are selling the house, moving to something within our means. You were right about taking responsibility. I smiled, feeling a small but significant victory. I am proud of you for that decision. 6 months passed. Jessica and I spoke regularly by phone. She and Michael did sell their house, moving to a modest apartment while they paid down debt. They visited me in Colorado, meeting Carol and seeing the life I had built. Jessica seemed genuinely happy for the relationship that had brought comfort to my life. A year after our meeting at the restaurant, Jessica called with news. She was pregnant. As she shared her excitement and fears about becoming a parent, she asked, "Would you come for the first ultrasound? I know it is traditional for the mother's mother to be there, but I would really like my dad." The day of the ultrasound, I sat in the waiting room until Jessica arrived. She hugged me tightly, then introduced me to the technician. "This is my father, Edwin," she said with no qualifiers, no explanations. As the fuzzy image appeared on the screen, Jessica reached for my hand. "There is your grandchild," she whispered. "Your grandchild." 2 words that bridged 15 years of absence. 2 words that healed wounds I had thought would pain me forever. Later, as we left the clinic, Jessica turned to me. "Dad," she said, testing the word that now came more naturally to her lips. "Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on you." The journey from that restaurant confrontation to this moment had not been easy. There had been difficult conversations, painful revelations, moments of doubt. On both sides. But standing there with my daughter, looking forward to the birth of my grandchild, I understood something profound about love and forgiveness. Sometimes the greatest victory is not in winning arguments or proving points. It is not in revenge or retribution. It is in the quiet dignity of standing in your truth, of offering love without conditions, of being willing to build bridges instead of walls. I had lost 15 years with my daughter. Nothing could restore that time. But in choosing truth over bitterness, in refusing to be used, but remaining open to reconciliation, I had gained something precious. Not just my daughter back in my life, but a sense of peace within myself. Sometimes winning is not about defeating someone else. It is about finding yourself again and helping others see the truth. My greatest victory was not in reclaiming my daughter, but in reclaiming myself and showing her the path back to her own integrity. Have you ever had to stand your ground with someone you love, knowing it might push them away forever? How did you balance truth with compassion? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that. Sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most healing outcomes. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, it is never too late for truth to prevail and relationships to heal.